I have set down many of Poirot's cases in the years of our friendship, and I have learned that certain stories resist the telling. They do not arrange themselves neatly into chapters. They do not offer clean beginnings or satisfying ends. They coil back upon themselves, snake-like, and the further one follows the trail, the less certain one becomes of where it started. The affair of the governess is such a story. It began, or rather, it announced itself to us, on a Thursday in early November, when the rain had been falling over London for 3 days without pause, and the world beyond our windows at Whitehaven Mansions had dissolved into a grey wash of umbrellas and damp overcoats. I was sitting by the fire, mending a fishing reel that did not strictly need mending, but which gave my hands something to do, when the door opened and Poirot entered, accompanied by a woman I had never seen before. She was perhaps 50, tall and upright, with the kind of bearing that speaks of discipline rather than privilege. Her clothes were good but not fashionable. A dark grey coat, a hat of practical rather than decorative purpose, gloves that had been mended at the seams. Her face was long and intelligent, handsome rather than pretty, with deep-set eyes that looked as though they had recently been acquainted with sleeplessness. "Hastings, this is Miss Elspeth Greer," Poirot said. "She has come to us from Thornfield House in Berkshire, and she has a most extraordinary story to tell. Sit down, please, mademoiselle. You are among friends." Miss Greer sat, but she did not relax. She perched on the edge of the chair the way a bird perches on a wire, ready at the slightest provocation to take flight. "I hardly know where to begin," she said. Her voice was low and steady, but I caught the faintest tremor beneath the surface, like a current running under ice. "Begin with what has brought you here today," Poirot said. "The event that made you seek the assistance of Hercule Poirot." She drew a breath. 3 days ago, the gardener at Thornfield House was digging a new bed for roses along the south wall of the kitchen garden. 18 inches down, his spade struck something. He thought it was a stone. It was not a stone. She paused. It was a human skull. I set down my fishing reel. "The police were called," she continued. "They excavated the site. The remains were those of a woman. She had been buried there, the doctor who examined the bones estimated, for approximately 20 years. There was no coffin, no shroud, just the bones and a few fragments of cloth. And one other thing." "What thing?" Poirot asked. "A locket, gold, oval, with a miniature portrait inside. The portrait was too damaged to identify, but on the reverse of the locket was an engraving. The initials CD and a date, June 1913. And these initials, they mean something to you." Miss Greer's hands tightened in her lap. "CD stands for Charlotte Devereux. She was the governess at Thornfield House before me. She disappeared in the autumn of 1913. No one ever knew what became of her. It was assumed she had simply left, taken another position, moved abroad, vanished into the anonymity that swallows so many women of our profession. But she did not leave. No, Monsieur Poirot, she was murdered and buried in the garden of the house where she had lived and worked. And for 20 years the family walked over her grave without knowing it. The fire crackled. The rain continued its patient assault on the windows. Poirot's fingers formed their familiar steeple. And you, Mademoiselle Greer, why do you come to me? This is a matter for the police, surely. The police have come and gone. They have taken the remains and opened an investigation, but the detective in charge, a Sergeant Plimpton, told me frankly that after 20 years there is very little they can do. The household of 1913 is scattered. Memories fade, evidence decays. Her jaw set. But I cannot let this rest. I have lived in that house for 18 years, Monsieur Poirot. I have cared for the children who grew up there. I have served the family faithfully. And now I learn that a woman who held the same position I hold, who slept in the same room, who walked the same corridors, was murdered under that roof and left to rot beneath the roses. She leaned forward. Someone in that house killed Charlotte Devereux. Someone who may still be alive. I want to know who. I want to know why. And I want Charlotte to have justice, even if it comes 20 years too late." Poirot regarded her for a long moment. Then he said, "Tell me about Thornfield House. Tell me about the family. Tell me everything you know about Charlotte Devereux, and tell me, mademoiselle, why you believe the answer lies in the present as much as the past." Miss Greer's account, delivered over the next hour with the precision of a woman accustomed to organizing other people's lives, painted a vivid picture. Thornfield House was a Georgian property of moderate grandeur near the village of Hartwell in Berkshire. It belonged to the Ashford family, specifically to Sir Lionel Ashford, now 72, a retired judge who had served on the bench for 30 years. Sir Lionel was a man of rigid propriety, she said, whose household ran with the clockwork regularity of a well-maintained court. In 1913, the household had been rather different. Sir Lionel, then merely Lionel Ashford, K.C., was 41, ambitious, newly appointed to the bench, and married to his first wife, Margaret. They had 2 children, Edward, then 10, and Rosalind, then 7. The governess, Charlotte Devereux, had been employed to educate the children. "Charlotte arrived in the spring of 1912, Miss Greer said. "I have pieced together what I can from old household records and the memories of those who remain. She was 26, well educated, the daughter of a clergyman from Suffolk. She was, by all accounts, intelligent, quiet, and devoted to the children. And she disappeared in the autumn of 1913. In October, the household records show that she was paid through September. In October, there is simply a note in the housekeeper's log. Miss Devereux departed. New governess required. No forwarding address, no reference given. Nothing. And no one inquired. That is the extraordinary thing, or rather, the damning thing. No one inquired. Not the housekeeper, not the family, not, as far as I can discover, anyone. A young woman vanished from a household of 15 people, and the world simply closed over the space she had occupied, like water filling a hole. Someone ensured that no inquiries were made, Poirot said quietly. That is what I believe. And the family now, who remains? Sir Lionel himself, though he is frail and rarely leaves his rooms. His first wife, Margaret, died in 1922 of pneumonia. He remarried in 1925. His second wife is Lady Frances Ashford, a much younger woman. Edward, the eldest child, is now 30. He manages the estate and lives in the main house with his wife Julia. Rosalind, the younger child, is 27. She married a man named Thomas Phelps 3 years ago and lives in the village. And then there are the servants, several of whom have been with the family since before the war. Since before 1913? Yes. Mrs. Briggs, the housekeeper, has been at Thornfield for 31 years, and Fenton, the head gardener, the man who found the grave, has worked the grounds since 1909. Poirot's eyes gleamed. So there exist in that house people who were present when Charlotte Devereux lived and died. People who may know far more than they have ever been asked. That is precisely why I have come to you. We drove down to Berkshire the following morning. The rain had stopped, replaced by a cold, clear sky that turned the November countryside into a study of browns and golds. The trees were nearly bare, their branches sketched against the pale sky like veins in an old hand. Thornfield House emerged from behind a screen of chestnuts, handsome, symmetrical, its red brick mellowed to a warm amber by 2 centuries of weather. Smoke rose from 3 of its many chimneys. The grounds were extensive, lawns rolling down to a stream, a walled kitchen garden to the south, and beyond it, woodland stretching toward the hills. It was the kitchen garden that drew my eye. A section near the south wall had been cordoned off with rope and stakes. The earth there was freshly turned, dark and raw against the faded grass. A few withered rose bushes, the planting that had prompted the discovery, lay uprooted beside the trench. "There," said Miss Greer, who had travelled with us. "That is where they found her." Poirot stood at the edge of the excavation for a long time, looking down into the empty grave. His expression was unreadable. 20 years, he murmured. She lay here for 20 years, while the household went about its business above her. While children played, while roses bloomed. He shook his head slowly. "It is an obscenity, Hastings. Not merely the murder, but the forgetting." Sir Lionel Ashford received us in his private sitting room on the first floor, a warm, book-lined space that smelled of leather and pipe tobacco. He was seated in a bath chair by the window, a woolen blanket across his knees, and he struck me as a man in whom physical decline had done nothing to diminish mental sharpness. His eyes, beneath bristling white brows, were as keen and cold as January. "Monsieur Poirot." His voice carried the precise articulation of a man who had spent decades delivering judgments from the bench. "Miss Greer tells me you wish to investigate the remains found in my garden. I must tell you plainly that I regard the matter as unfortunate, but hardly requiring the attention of a private detective. A woman was murdered in your house, Sir Lionel. A woman died in or near my house 20 years ago. We do not yet know that she was murdered. She may have died of natural causes and been buried by someone who panicked. With respect, Sir Lionel, healthy women of 26 do not die of natural causes and end up buried 18 inches deep in kitchen gardens." The old judge's mouth thinned. He was accustomed to being the one who asked the questions, I thought, and Poirot's directness did not sit well. "Very well, ask your questions. I have nothing to hide." "Charlotte Devereux. You employed her as governess to your children in 1912. My wife employed her. Margaret handled the domestic arrangements. I was occupied with my practice. But you knew her. You interacted with her. Naturally. She dined with the family, as governesses do. She was competent. The children were fond of her, particularly Rosalind. And in October 1913 she left. So I was informed. You did not see her leave? You did not say goodbye?" Sir Lionel's gaze was steady. "I was in London for much of that month. Sessions at the Old Bailey. When I returned, Margaret told me the governess had given notice and departed. It was not unusual. Governesses come and go. And you did not think it strange that no forwarding address was left? That no reference was requested?" "I did not think about it at all, Monsieur Poirot. I had other matters on my mind. A man in my position does not concern himself with the comings and goings of household staff." There was something chilling in his dismissal. Not malice, but a blanket indifference to the fate of a young woman who had lived under his roof. I found myself disliking Sir Lionel Ashford intensely, though I could not have said precisely why. We left him and sought out Mrs. Briggs, the housekeeper. She was a formidable woman of 68, broad-shouldered, with hands reddened by decades of work and a manner that suggested she had never in her life tolerated nonsense from anyone, including Belgian detectives. She received us in her sitting room off the kitchen passage, a small, immaculate space furnished with the accumulated treasures of a lifetime in service. China figurines, framed photographs, a grandfather clock that ticked with the authority of a metronome. "Charlotte Devereux," she said in response to Poirot's question. "Yes, I remember her. Quiet girl, kept to herself mostly, which suited me. Governesses who put on airs are more trouble than they're worth." "What do you remember of her departure?" Mrs. Briggs's expression shifted, a tightening around the mouth, a flicker of something in her eyes that might have been discomfort. "She left in October. I came down one morning and her room was empty. Bed made, wardrobe cleared, not a trace of her. Lady Ashford, the first Lady Ashford, that is, told me Charlotte had been called away urgently. Family illness, she said. Charlotte had left in the night. And you believed this? It wasn't my place to believe or disbelieve. Lady Ashford gave an order, and I followed it. That's how a household works. What order? Again that tightening. She told me to pack up anything Charlotte had left behind and dispose of it, and she told me not to discuss the matter with anyone. Poirot leaned forward. Not to discuss it. Those were her exact words. She said, "Mrs. Briggs, we will not speak of Miss Devereux again. It is a private matter, and I will not have it gossiped about among the staff." And that was that. I did as I was told. But you had doubts. Mrs. Briggs was silent for a long moment. The clock ticked. Rain began to patter against the window once more, soft and persistent. "I found something," she said at last. "When I was clearing Charlotte's room, under the mattress, a letter, half written. It was addressed to her sister in Ipswich." "What did it say?" "It said—" Mrs. Briggs paused, and for the first time her formidable composure cracked. "It said, 'Dearest Alice, I must tell someone what I have discovered, or I shall go mad with it. The truth about this family is worse than I could have imagined. I found something in the study, a document that changes everything. I'm frightened, Alice. I do not know whom I can trust. If anything should happen to me—" It stopped there, mid-sentence, as though she had been interrupted. "And you kept this letter?" "For 20 years. Mrs. Briggs rose and went to a small bureau in the corner. From a locked drawer, she produced a folded sheet of paper, yellowed with age. The ink faded, but still legible. She handed it to Poirot. I told myself it meant nothing, that she'd simply left in a hurry and forgotten it, but I kept it. I don't know why. Perhaps I knew even then that something was wrong. Poirot read the letter in silence, then passed it to me. Charlotte's handwriting was neat and regular, the hand of an educated woman. But the final lines sloped downward, the letters growing uneven, as though written in haste or agitation. This document she mentions, the one she found in the study. Do you have any idea what it might have been? None. Sir Lionel's study was his private domain. No one entered without invitation. And the First Lady Ashford. Margaret. What manner of woman was she? Mrs. Briggs chose her words with care. She was a devoted wife, devoted to the point of blindness, some might say. Sir Lionel was everything to her, his career, his reputation, his comfort. She guarded them all with a ferocity that could be admirable or frightening, depending on where you stood. Frightening. I have seen Lady Ashford dismiss a kitchen maid for burning toast, and I have seen her charm a bishop at the dinner table in the same afternoon. She was capable of great warmth and great coldness, often within the same hour. She was not a woman to cross. And her relationship with Charlotte? Cordial on the surface. But there were tensions. Charlotte was young, clever, and, well, Mrs. Briggs hesitated. She was attractive, Monsieur Poirot, not in a showy way, but she had a quality, a light about her, and Sir Lionel noticed. The implication hung in the air like smoke. You believe there was an attachment between Sir Lionel and the governess? I believe, Mrs. Briggs said carefully, that Charlotte Devereux was a good and decent girl who found herself in a situation she did not seek and could not control. And I believe that Margaret Ashford was the kind of woman who would sooner destroy a rival than share a husband. Edward Ashford met us in the estate office, a converted stable block where he managed the property's affairs with the methodical competence of a man who had inherited his father's discipline, if not his ambition. He was 30, fair-haired, with a long face and careful eyes. His wife, Julia, a pleasant, pink-cheeked woman who was clearly pregnant, brought tea and then withdrew. I was 10 when Miss Devereux was with us, Edward said, old enough to remember her clearly. She was kind, patient. She used to read to us in the evenings. Rosalind adored her, and she had a way of making lessons interesting. History came alive when Charlotte told it. She made you feel as though you were there, and then she left. Edward's face changed, Mother told us she had gone away, that her family needed her. Rosalind cried for days. She kept asking when Charlotte would come back. Mother said she wouldn't, and that we were not to speak of her. Did that strike you as strange? I was 10. Everything adults did struck me as strange. But yes, looking back, the absoluteness of it was odd. Not just that Charlotte had left, but that all trace of her was erased. Her books were removed from the schoolroom. The photograph she'd given Rosalind was taken away. It was as though she'd never existed. And your father? What was his reaction? Edward was quiet for a moment. He didn't speak of it. But I remember, and I've never told anyone this, I remember hearing him in his study late at night, a few days after Charlotte left. I'd crept downstairs for water. The study door was closed, but I could hear him. He was crying. I had never heard my father cry before. I have never heard him cry since. The weight of that admission settled over us like a fall of dust. One more thing, Edward added. About a week after Charlotte left, I saw my mother in the garden. Late afternoon, the light was going. She was near the south wall of the kitchen garden, standing by the rose beds. She had a spade. I called out to her, and she spun round, furious, told me to get back inside. I'd never seen her so angry. Near the south wall, Poirot repeated. Where the body was found. Yes, and you never connected these things. I was a child, Monsieur Poirot. Children see everything and understand nothing. It's only now, with the discovery of the bones, that these fragments of memory have rearranged themselves into something coherent and something terrible. We found Rosalind Phelps at her cottage in the village, a pretty, wisteria-draped place that might have been charming in summer but looked merely damp in November. She opened the door herself, a small, pale woman with an intensity about her that reminded me, faintly, of Miss Greer. Her husband, Thomas, a quiet, sandy-haired man who worked as a land agent, excused himself to his office at the back of the house. Rosalind did not wait for questions. I know why you're here, she said the moment we were seated. Charlotte, they've found Charlotte. You seem very certain it is she, Poirot observed. Who else would it be? A body buried in our garden, and the locket. Miss Greer described the locket to me. C.D. Charlotte Devereux. I gave her that locket. You gave it to her? For her birthday. June 1913. I saved my pocket money for months. I was 7 years old, and I loved Charlotte more than anyone in the world except my mother. She was like a sister and a friend and a protector all in one. She made me feel safe in a house where nothing else did. Her eyes filled. She blinked the tears back with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned long ago not to cry in front of strangers. When she left, when they said she'd gone, I didn't believe it. I told Mother she would never leave without saying goodbye to me. Mother slapped me, the only time she ever struck me. And then she held me and said, "Some people leave, Rosalind, and there's nothing we can do about it. You must learn to let go." And did you? Let go? No. The word was fierce, absolute. I wrote to Charlotte's sister, Alice, in Ipswich. I was 7, but I could write, because Charlotte had taught me beautifully. I asked Alice where Charlotte was. The letter came back a month later. Alice wrote that she hadn't heard from Charlotte since September, that no one in the family had, that they were worried. What did you do? I showed the letter to my mother. She took it from me, read it, and put it in the fire. She said Alice was confused. She said I was to write no more letters. And she said, and I remember the exact words, Monsieur Poirot, because they carved themselves into me. She said, Charlotte chose to leave us. Some women do that. They leave and they don't look back. You must be stronger than that, Rosaline. Poirot was very still. And now I know, Rosaline continued, her voice shaking. Charlotte didn't choose to leave. She didn't leave at all. She's been in our garden for 20 years, under the roses my mother planted. My mother—" She broke off. "You believe your mother killed Charlotte Devereux?" The silence that followed was the longest I'd experienced in any of Poirot's cases. Rosalind Phelps stared at the fire, her hands knotted in her lap, her face a battlefield of grief and fury, and the terrible, reluctant clarity of a truth too long denied. "I believe my mother knew what happened to Charlotte. Whether she did it herself or had it done, I cannot say, but she knew. She planted those roses, Monsieur Poirot, in the exact spot. She tended them every year until she died. She called them her memorial garden. We all assumed she meant in memory of her own mother, who had loved roses." "A memorial," Poirot murmured. "Yes, a memorial of a very different kind." We returned to Thornfield House as the afternoon light was dying. The shadows of the bare trees stretched long across the lawns, and the house itself seemed to darken, its windows catching the last copper gleam of sunset before surrendering to the November dusk. Poirot was unusually quiet during the walk from the village. I had learned, over our years together, to distinguish between his silences: the comfortable silence of satisfaction, the tense silence of concentration, and the heavy silence that came when a case had touched something deeper than mere intellectual curiosity. This was the third kind. "You are troubled," I said. "I am angry, Hastings, which is not the same thing. A young woman was killed and buried in a garden, and the household conspired, whether actively or through willful ignorance, to erase her from existence. Her family was never told, her grave was never marked. She was simply disappeared, as though she were an inconvenient piece of furniture, rather than a human being with a life, with people who loved her. But we're getting closer to the truth. Rosalind's testimony, Mrs. Briggs' letter. We are getting closer to a truth, mon ami, but the question that troubles me most is not who killed Charlotte Devereux. I'm forming a very clear picture of that. The question is what she discovered, the documents she mentioned in her unfinished letter, the thing she found in Sir Lionel's study that was terrible enough to frighten her, and perhaps terrible enough to get her killed. You think the document still exists? 20 years is a long time. But men like Sir Lionel, men of law, men of order, they do not destroy documents. They file them, they lock them away, they build walls of paperwork around themselves, because to a man who has spent his life in the courts, a document is a kind of power. We went directly to the study. Sir Lionel had retired for the evening, and Miss Greer, who had been quietly facilitating our investigation with the competence of a woman who ran a household by day and apparently a detective operation by night, produced the key. The study was large, panelled in walnut, with a partner's desk of imposing proportions and bookshelves that ran from floor to ceiling on 3 walls. A portrait of Margaret Ashford hung above the fireplace. A formal oil painting showing a handsome woman in her mid-30s, dark-haired, with a direct gaze and a mouth that combined determination with something harder. Beauty and steel, I thought. Poirot began methodically. He examined the desk drawers, the filing cabinets, the concealed compartments that old desks invariably possess. He ran his fingers along the bookshelves, tapping occasionally at the paneling. He examined the backs of picture frames and the undersides of furniture with the thoroughness of a man who has searched 100 rooms and knows that secrets are never kept where you would first think to look. I occupied myself by examining the bookshelves. Sir Lionel's collection was what you might expect of a retired judge. Blackstone's Commentaries, Halsbury's Laws of England, bound volumes of legal reports stretching back decades. But interspersed among the legal tomes were more personal volumes, novels, histories, a shelf of poetry that surprised me. It was behind the poetry that I found it. Not a document, precisely, but a box, small, wooden, inlaid with mother-of-pearl, the sort of thing a woman might keep jewelry in. It had been pushed to the very back of the shelf, behind a complete set of Keats, and it was thick with dust. Poirot. I held it out. He took it, examined the exterior, then opened the clasp. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, were several items. A pressed flower, a rose, brown and brittle with age, a lock of dark hair tied with a ribbon, a photograph, small, sepia-toned, of a young woman in a high-collared blouse, her face intelligent and gentle, her eyes looking directly into the lens with an expression that was both trusting and faintly sad. "Charlotte," Poirot said softly. Beneath these personal relics was a folded document. Poirot extracted it with delicate care, unfolded it, and read. I watched his face. Whatever the document contained, it struck him with force. His eyebrows rose, his lips compressed. He read it again, then a third time before finally holding it out to me. It was a letter, handwritten, dated March 1913. The handwriting was feminine, educated, and unfamiliar. My dear Lionel, I write to confirm what Dr. Saunders has told us both. The child is expected in December. I know this news brings you joy, as it does me, but we must be practical. I cannot remain at Thornfield indefinitely without questions being asked. Margaret suspects nothing yet, but Mrs. Briggs is observant and the other servants talk. I trust your judgment in all things. You have promised to provide for us, and I believe you, but I must ask you plainly. What is to become of me? Of us? You speak of a cottage, of an arrangement. I need more than words, Lionel. I need certainty. Yours always, Charlotte. I looked up from the letter. Good God, she was carrying his child. Yes, Poirot said. And now, Hastings, we begin to see the shape of this tragedy. Charlotte Devereux was not merely the governess who was convenient to dismiss. She was the woman carrying the master's child, the threat to Margaret Ashford's marriage, her husband's career, the family's reputation. The document Charlotte found in the study. Could it have been a letter from her own correspondence? Something she'd written to Sir Lionel that he'd kept? Perhaps. Or perhaps something else. A response from a doctor, an arrangement for her confinement, something that proved in black and white what Margaret Ashford feared above all things, that her husband had fallen in love with another woman, and that the evidence of that love was growing, day by day, impossible to deny. So Margaret discovered the affair, and she did what women of her class and era were trained to do, Hastings. She protected her husband's reputation, her children's future, and the family name, at any cost. I felt cold, not from the temperature of the room, but from the implications of what we had uncovered. But Charlotte's letter to her sister mentioned finding a document that frightened her, something in this study that was worse than she could have imagined. If the document was about her own pregnancy, why would she describe it that way? She already knew she was pregnant. Poirot gave me one of his rare looks of approval. Excellent, Hastings. You're right. The document Charlotte found was not about herself. It was about something else. Something about the family. About Sir Lionel, specifically. That was so damaging, so terrible, that it changed everything. What could be worse than an affair with the governess? That, mon ami, is what we must discover. Fenton, the head gardener, was 71 years old and looked every day of it. His face was the color and texture of a walnut, seamed by decades of wind and sun, and his hands, enormous, earth-stained, permanently curled as though still gripping a spade, told the story of a life spent in the soil. We found him in the potting shed, a cluttered, earthy-smelling space filled with terracotta pots, seed trays, and the accumulated tools of a lifetime's craft. He was sitting on an upturned crate, smoking a pipe, and when we entered, he looked at us with the resigned expression of a man who has been expecting bad news and is merely waiting for it to assume its final shape. "I wondered when you'd come," he said. Poirot settled himself on a wooden stool with the care of a man who does not entirely trust outdoor furniture. You knew Charlotte Devereux, Monsieur Fenton. I knew her. And you know more about her death than you have told the police. Fenton drew on his pipe. The smoke curled upward in the cold air of the shed, twisting and dissolving. I didn't kill her, if that's what you're asking. I'm asking what you know. A long silence. Outside, a robin sang, that thin, sweet autumn song that is the loneliest sound in the English countryside. I was 22 in 1913, Fenton said at last, under gardener. I'd been at Thornfield 3 years. Charlotte, Miss Devereux, she used to walk in the garden in the evenings after the children were in bed. She liked the roses. We'd talk sometimes about nothing much. She was lonely, I think. The house was grand, but it wasn't friendly. You were fond of her. Fenton's weathered face softened. I loved her, Monsieur Poirot. Quietly, hopelessly, the way a man in my position loves a woman in hers. I never spoke of it. She was educated, clever, beautiful in her own way. I was a gardener's boy with dirt under my nails, but I watched over her, made sure the garden was always at its best when she walked there. Small things. And then, in the summer of 1913, something changed. Charlotte became withdrawn, anxious. She stopped walking in the garden. When I saw her, she looked as though she'd been crying. I didn't know about the baby then. I learned that later. Much later, when it was too late. How did you learn? Fenton took the pipe from his mouth and stared at it. Lady Ashford told me. On the night Charlotte died. The words dropped into the shed like stones into a well. Poirot did not move. Tell me. It was late October, a cold night. I remember frost on the ground. I'd been working late, repairing a cold frame near the kitchen garden wall. It was past 10 o'clock. I was about to go to my cottage when I heard voices. Lady Ashford's voice, raised, not shouting, but fierce, the way she got when she was truly angry. And another voice, Charlotte's, pleading. Where were they? By the south wall, near the potting shed. I couldn't see clearly. It was dark, just the light from the kitchen windows. But I could hear. Lady Ashford was saying, "You will leave tonight. I've arranged a cab. You will take nothing that belongs to this house, and you will never contact my husband or my children again." Charlotte was crying. She said, "I can't. Where will I go? The baby." And Lady Ashford said, I'll never forget her voice, cold as the grave itself. She said, "There is no baby. There is no you. You are nothing. And if you do not leave this house within the hour, I will make certain that everyone you have ever known learns what kind of woman you are." Fenton's pipe had gone out. He did not notice. Charlotte said something I couldn't hear. Then there was a sound, a sharp sound, like a crack, and then silence. Complete silence. "What did you do?" "I came around the wall and I saw." His voice broke. He was a man of 71, hardened by half a century of physical labor, and he wept. "I saw Charlotte on the ground. Lady Ashford standing over her, holding a garden edging stone, the kind with the sharp edge, for trimming borders. Charlotte wasn't moving. There was blood. Lady Ashford struck her. I don't think she meant to kill her. They'd been arguing. Charlotte must have said something or moved toward her. Margaret hit her once. But the stone, the edge of it, hit her temple. Charlotte went down and she didn't get up. And then, Lady Ashford saw me. She turned and saw me standing there, and for a moment I thought she would strike me too. But she didn't. She was perfectly calm. She said, "Fenton, you will help me, or you will hang alongside me." And God help me, I helped her. The confession poured out now, unstoppable, the accumulated poison of 20 years releasing itself in a torrent. They had buried Charlotte that night. Fenton dug the grave. A deep one, 3 feet rather than the 18 inches the recent excavation had reached. And they lowered her body into it, wrapped in a bedsheet. Lady Ashford placed the locket around Charlotte's neck before they covered her. Fenton had not understood the gesture at the time. Later, he thought it might have been guilt, or perhaps a kind of twisted tenderness, the acknowledgement that Charlotte had been loved, even by the man whose wife had killed her. She planted the roses the following spring, Fenton said, told me exactly where she wanted them. Right over the grave. She tended them herself every year until she died. I offered to take over, but she wouldn't have it. Those roses were hers. And you said nothing. For 20 years. I was a coward, Monsieur Poirot. A coward and an accessory. Lady Ashford reminded me of that fact regularly, always with perfect politeness, always with a smile. She owned me from that night forward. When she asked me to do something, I did it. When she asked me to forget, I forgot. Or I tried to. But you could not. No. Fenton looked down at his earth-stained hands. I think about Charlotte every day, every single day. I tend the garden where she lies, and I talk to her sometimes when no one else is about. I tell her I'm sorry. I don't suppose she hears. Poirot was quiet for a long time. Then he said gently, "There is one more thing I must ask. Charlotte's letter to her sister mentioned finding a document in Sir Lionel's study. Something that frightened her. Do you know what it was?" Fenton shook his head. "She never told me. But I know this. Whatever she found, she showed it to Lady Ashford. Charlotte was that kind of woman, honest, direct. She would have confronted them with it, whatever it was. And that confrontation may have precipitated the final argument. I've thought the same thing many times." Poirot rose. "Monsieur Fenton, you have carried a terrible burden. The law will have its say about your part in concealing this crime, but the truth you have spoken today, it gives Charlotte Devereux something she has been denied for 20 years. What's that? A witness, someone who remembers her, someone who says, 'She was here, she mattered, she did not deserve what was done to her.'" Fenton nodded, unable to speak, and we left him in the potting shed, an old man surrounded by the instruments of growth and cultivation, weeping for a woman he had buried among the roses half a lifetime ago. What Poirot did next surprised me. Rather than returning to Sir Lionel with Fenton's confession, he asked Miss Greer to arrange access to the household archives, the family papers, account books and correspondence stored in a locked room on the upper floor that served as a kind of informal family museum. "But we know what happened," I protested. "Margaret Ashford killed Charlotte. Fenton confirmed it. The case is solved." "The murder is explained, Hastings. But the mystery is not. What did Charlotte find? What was the document that frightened her? That answer matters, because it tells us not just how Charlotte died, but why, and whether Margaret Ashford acted in jealous rage or in calculated defense of something even more dangerous than an affair. The archives occupied a long, narrow room under the eaves, lined with shelves and cabinets. Miss Greer had organized them with her customary precision, each box labeled, each file dated, everything in order. It was, Poirot remarked, the room of a woman who understood that the past must be kept tidy if it is to be kept at all. We worked for 3 hours. Poirot examined legal papers, financial records, personal correspondence. He read with the speed and focus of a man who knows precisely what he is looking for, even if he cannot yet name it. I was the one who found the second hidden thing. In a box of miscellaneous papers from 1910 to 1915, sandwiched between a receipt from a Jermyn Street tailor and an invitation to a law society dinner, was a small envelope marked "Private" in Sir Lionel's handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a medical report dated February 1913 from a Dr. Saunders in Harley Street. I read it. Then I read it again, because the first time I could not believe what it said. "Poirot," My voice came out strangely. "You need to see this." He took the report and read it